100 Years of Voting Rights for Women, read to you by Carol Brigham. The year 2020 is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This amendment gave American women the right to vote. It was the largest expansion of democracy in our country's history. There will be events all over the United States this year to celebrate this centennial. One of the very first events will be the Rose Parade in Pasadena, California on New Year's Day. A women's suffrage float will lead the way. The fight begins. Before 1920, women had very few rights. They could not inherit property. They could not keep their children in a divorce. They could not enter most professions. They could not serve on a jury. If they worked, their money belonged to their husbands. They could not open a bank account or apply for a loan. They were not allowed to speak in public organizations. Many women wanted freedom for themselves. But first, they worked hard for the abolition of slavery. When abolitionists went to a convention in England, the men would not allow women on the convention floor. The women were very hurt and angry. Back in the U.S., Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote a Declaration of Sentiments. It listed the rights that women should have. An important right was the right to vote. Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York, in 1848. 200 women and 40 men came. After the Civil War, these women were so happy that the slaves were free. In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave the former male slaves the right to vote. What about women? Women had hoped to get the right to vote too. On November 5, 1872, Susan B. Anthony led 14 women to vote in an election. Police arrested her. A judge ordered her to pay $100. She refused. See her speech at historyplace.com/speeches/anthony.htm. This showed that it would be a long fight for the right to vote. She and Elizabeth Cady Stanton started the National Woman Suffrage Association. They wrote the words for an amendment to the Constitution. The suffragists. Anthony, Stanton, and thousands of women suffragists worked year after year. They made speeches, they published newspapers, they marched in parades, they traveled to Washington, D.C., they petitioned their congressmen and senators. For a long time, other people laughed at the suffragists. The daily newspapers ridiculed them. Many men supported the suffragists. They knew it was the right thing to do. But others said that women were not smart enough to have useful opinions about politics. They said that voting rights for women would destroy families. We need a constitutional amendment. The struggle for women's right to vote went on for 7 decades. Finally, a few states allowed women to vote. The suffragists wanted all American women to have the right to vote. They needed an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The National American Woman Suffrage Association, led by Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, organized a parade in Washington, D.C. It was on March 3, 1913. This was the day before President Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. It was the very first large political demonstration in the nation's capital. 8,000 women and men marched, while 500,000 people came to see them. Some people in the crowd attacked the marchers as they walked down Pennsylvania Avenue. Police stood by and did not stop the violence. More than 100 marchers were hurt. President Wilson said it was not yet time for women to vote. The Silent Sentinels. In January 1917, women began a silent protest in front of the White House. The Silent Sentinels stood there with their signs day after day in sun, rain, and snow. In April that year, the U.S. entered World War I. Some Americans thought the Silent Sentinels should stop their protest. But the women continued 6 days a week for 2.5 years until June 4, 1919. Passerby sometimes attacked the peaceful protesters and tore their signs out of their hands. Police began to arrest the women for blocking traffic. The women spent time in jail, but when they got out, they stood silently once more. As the days went on, angry mobs attacked them. Courts sent the women to jail for longer periods of time. Alice Paul was sent to jail for 7 months. Conditions in jail were horrible. Alice Paul and the others went on a hunger strike. They refused to eat. After many days, they were sick and weak. The prison guards were afraid they would die. They fed the women by force. They poured raw eggs through the tubes in the women's noses. They moved Alice Paul to the psychiatric ward of the jail. 19th Amendment passes. Newspapers told the story of the conditions for the women in jail. Soon, public pressure grew in favor of the suffragists. The courts let Alice Paul and the other suffrage prisoners out of jail. 2 months later, President Wilson asked Congress to vote for the suffrage amendment. In May 1919, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the amendment. On June 4, the Senate also passed it. This 19th Amendment was called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. The next challenge was to get 3/4 of the 48 states to ratify it. The suffragists in each state went to work. A year later, on August 18, 1920, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the amendment. The Susan B. Anthony Amendment became part of the U.S. Constitution on August 26, 1920. Celebrations in 2020. On August 26 this year, there will be a new monument to honor 3 women suffragists in Central Park in New York City. The monument shows Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Sojourner Truth. Many museums, schools, and libraries will have events to celebrate the historic Centennial. Sometime in the future, Lucretia Mott, Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Alice Paul will be on the back of a new $10 bill. To subscribe to Easy English News, and for more information about our free resources and additional works written by Elizabeth Clare, visit our website, elizabethclare.com.